Okay, hello everyone. Time for preparation is up. We're going to start the debate very soon. Okay. Welcome to quarterfinal rounds of NSDC 2021, everyone. Congratulations for making it this far. Before we start the debate, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jinsan Jaya from Parayan Catholic University, Jawa Barat, and I'll be acting as your chair for this debate. Now, with me are four other panels. Allow me to give the floor for them to introduce themselves. Whichever can go first, ladies.
Okay, I'll go first. Hi, everyone. I'm Balkis from Universitas Indonesia, and I'll be judging as panel today. Good luck.
Hi guys, my name is Madeline. Good luck with the debate.
Hi guys, I'm Jaja from Universitas Indonesia. Good luck for the round.
Hello everyone, I'm Mae from Universitas Diponegoro. Good luck for the debate.
Thank you, everyone. To start the debate, the motion for today's debate will be this House would disallow pharmaceutical products, for example, medicine, vaccine, tech or equipment, etc., to hold patents when distributed to developing countries. On proposition, we have Sumatera Utara, and on opposition, we have Kepulauan Riau. We're going to start the debate very soon. Please bear in mind that please mention your preferred POI and gender pronouns if there's any before your speech, and I'll be timing through the chat box. Without further ado, let's start the debate. I would like to call upon the Prime Minister to the floor.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you. Okay. So yeah, I'm Jones, he, him pronouns, and I prefer my POS through chat. Thank you. The existence of patents takes advantage of the desperation of the sick and dying to neglect them and make them pay exorbitant prices for drugs. On proposition, we say it's time to end their tyranny. Two setups before I jump into my speech. Number one, we will disallow pharmaceutical products like vaccines, medical equipment to be patented. Note that patent is different from banning them altogether from selling the products. It means we are taking the exclusive right for these corporations to sell the medicine that they patent. That means other companies can also produce and sell safe medicines. Secondly, just like the producers that are inside of school, we are happy to support disclosure of information as well as giving royalty to patent holders, ranging for like 3% to 5% as compensation for innovation. Having said that, two arguments in my speech. Number one, on the most important material, accessibility of medicines. Secondly, why intellectual property right in context of how it can be compromised. I'll also preempt opposition and show why innovation still exists on both sides, therefore not an important metric. Firstly, on accessibility. Understand the context of the patent. Patents give exclusive rights for innovative companies to produce and sell certain drugs in the market. That means on up, there's only one company that holds the products and certain medicines. The problem is that the fact that they are the only ones who have the access to the supply. They have the incentive to drive the medicines to an exorbitant price, but in virtue that companies are profit oriented, and the fact that there's no competition will just drive them even more. Three structural reasons why accessibility is worse on up. One, patent drives away market competition and turn the innovating company as the sole oligopoly. Patented medicine make drugs extremely unaffordable due to the lack of competition. That is why insulin is about $10,000 a month to supply in the United States, but it's a very low production cost in Canada, for example. It's because in the US, private firms and their patents make it sold there, like so there's slightly only one seller, and they can jack up prices however they want. In contrast to like Canada, for example, where they don't have patents because it's nationalized. But secondly, even if Op says, oh, they can make another company who innovates the same medicine like Astra and Sinovac. Number one, this doesn't engage in all types of diseases, especially like in niche diseases. And as an illustration, the reason why EpiPens can monopolize the market and jack up prices to a large degree is because they are the sole innovator of the treatment for allergic reactions caused anaphylaxis. So opposition has to engage like in the specific types of diseases that might not be the pandemic, where it's economically viable to innovate, but also specific diseases that also affect lives of individuals that don't have as much as funds innovating. Even if yes, this is still bad for two reasons. Firstly, on time, note that Moderna and like EG vaccines are produced long time after Sinovac monopolized the market. In that span of time, developing countries cannot afford buying the vaccine, or they cannot buy as much in that kind of span of time. Like thousands still have to die because they cannot afford those kinds of things. Secondly, I think innovating firms usually exist in different sectors of pharma, making it hard to address specific symptoms and treatment for illnesses. But thirdly, the third reason, if oppositions say, oh, price is okay because there's competition, it is not true for two reasons. A, patent drugs are competitors, but B, pharmaceutical goods are inelastic. What we mean by that is that people are desperate if they have something like cancer, so they will buy drugs no matter what the cost is. And since companies are profit maximizing, it's very easy to gouge as much as you want because people need those drugs to save their lives. In particular, price gouging is made possible because demand is constant, and that given this relative uncompetitive market, it is necessary to protect accessibility for developing states. Why is this essential? Because these are things that are determine people's life, whether they live or they die. Therefore, they can live a pain-free life or suffer interminably. This suggests that cheap drugs and access to quality drugs is very incredibly important, and we can only get that on our side when these drugs are being invested into a way that is unique to our world. The impact of this point is that it's super important for people to have access to life-saving medication. It is not enough for drugs to exist. You need to access this drug without having to forego paying your rent, without having to go into debt, or without having to seek treatment in the first place because you need to pay for your kids' schooling instead, for example. But third analysis, why is it the obligation of the developed countries? Society in developed nations is the direct beneficiary from the suffering in the developing nations, and they're factually guilty for four reasons. Number one, there's the colonization. Countries like the US and the UK colonized hundreds of countries and left them in phases of poverty. Second, it's the geographical area. Even if they don't indoctrinate them, they actually kill the surrounding area by stopping trade between states, which is crucially for developing worlds in the past. But thirdly, global monopoly. Exactly when they can accumulate that wealth, their greed drives them to acceptable means to be capitalistic and greedy. But fourthly, what was indoctrination? What majority always indoctrinates lying shares, the discriminatory remarks that strips away the choices of minorities in Asia, black people and those who live in that non-white majority. What happened in status quo is that the reason why people in developing nations have to suffer up to this moment is because of the colonization that happened in the past. Where the West, they are mostly came to colonize developing nations like Indonesia, which makes Indonesia in a dire suffering because we can see how in the moment when they become colonized Indonesia, they take up away our land, they cut off our wages, they give us wages lower than the minimum, etc. But not only in Indonesia, where we believe that the impacts of the colonialism were similar, regardless of the specific colonizer, like the disease, destruction of indigenous social, political, and economic structures, like repression, exploitation, land displacement, and land degradation, which set back developing countries from being able to develop and making their own vaccine in the very first place. But before jumping to my second argument, is there any POIs? Great. Secondly, why intellectual property right in context of how it can be compromised. I'll also preempt opposition and show why innovation still exists on both sides, therefore not an important metric. Let's preempt out. Even if opposition will talk about intellectual property, we will trade off the intellectual property for four sorts of reasons. Number one, on our side, we may only harm the upper social class because presumably they're the one who have the ability to fund it, right? Which is generally less than the middle or lower class social class, which is significantly more in the developing country. On their side, they endanger the majority of people living in that country who cannot afford to buy patented vaccines for themselves and their families and their daughters and etc. But secondly, numerically, we save more people in this developing country compared to the opposite side, who only save people who are already rich and already have a safety net without patenting. They still have other business or investment, but people who have no other choice are harmed on their side. But thirdly, the possibility of harm from the opposition is very clear that the public will not be able to afford these vaccines or pharmaceutical. Comparatively, on our side, the executives or rich people will not necessarily suffer from the absence of patent because they can still have investment or the money in the bank. So the possibility for losses that occur is far greater in the opposition team. Because if they want to talk about how they're going to protect those kinds of invested and rich executives, they still get the sense of economy funded, they still get the profit when they still sell those kinds of vaccines and medicine because people still wanted it. But fourthly, our alternative is less harmful because there's more access for the public to get access to the vaccine, and the vaccine will still be produced by the executive because vaccines are high supply and demand. So without patents, the market is still trying to produce vaccine, is still open in proportion side. But the advantages of our alternative are A, we get more access to pharmaceutical for the underprivileged, but B, pharmaceutical production will continue to run with a market that demands, for example, like vaccines and etc. But secondly, why does innovation still exist? One, because corporations still get the popular name if they become the first developer or the first mover advantage of one pharmaceutical. That means consumers want to buy for them more because society gives them trust to them, and therefore the first developer still get much demand. Secondly, like the pandemic, irrespective of a patent or not, companies they still want to innovate because they can still sell it with the demand that's still high and it's still economic viable. But lastly, why can intellectual property still be traded off? Number one, because the resources owned by pharma companies also come from legal production and funding provided by the government, where the government takes over and interferes in the development of these companies, such as giving tax breaks or tax cuts to private companies that enable and improve certain companies or scientists. That is why, for such in the context like in the COVID-19 vaccines, therefore rights are not absolute, and the government can also claim these rights. Secondly, the resources they are given by the state is a product of past colonialism from developing countries as well. But thirdly, moreover, there's no intrinsic reason why people have rights to their property, especially when it comes to technology. Tech patents rely on how quickly you file them, which is completely arbitrary. What's more, patents are designed for the greater good and not to protect some of the intrinsic rights owner have over their property. That is why patent expires after a few years, because although the inventor can still claim ownership of the product, the patent has gone beyond its purpose. Therefore, patents are basically not absolute and no more important rights of human dignity. The fact that there's only like a few years for patent in and of itself. But fourthly, in weighing, by severity of impact, it is far less harmful because pharma companies can still gain profit even without patent. But what does all has to defend? Without accessible medical treatment, thousands to millions of people die in one day. Children who have to suffer because of the pandemic they are facing when there's a patent of pharmaceuticals. What happens is that the prices of the products such as EpiPen and the insulin will become more expensive on the people, especially from poor countries who don't have the ability to buy these products, and concerned people who are arbitrarily born in developing countries just have to die because of their inaccessibility. Therefore, rights of patent can be ruled out because the impact on the society is much greater for all those reasons proposed.
Thank you very much for Prime Minister. Calling upon Leader of Opposition to start their case.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
My gender pronouns will be she or her, and my POI preference is just through the chat. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Pharmaceutical products are important for the people's health. You can't let other actors create medicines without the patents from the franchise itself, exactly because under your side, even if accessibility exists, however, it comes at the expense of the safety nets for the people to use and consume of these pharmaceutical products, especially when it comes to context of people's health in the developing countries itself, right? 2 points of mechanism under our side. Firstly, we still want the patent to still be unable towards these franchise itself. We want to establish the full security of these pharmaceutical products first before the distribution, despite of all of the benefits of accessibility that comes from PM. Secondly, the money that we get from the patent is going to be allocated towards the institution to create further research instead, to make sure that the quality that we get from these pharmaceutical products are going to be maximized to its fullest potential, right? Before moving on to my arguments, few responses for their side of the house. Firstly, under claim by the monopoly of product prices, we said it is going to be irrelevant under 3 reasons. First, there are multiple companies that create vaccine and medicine, which is why you have Sinovac, Pfizer, Moderna, and etc. in status quo, right? You don't only have one type of vaccine, you have multiple types of vaccine. Secondly, we said that market competition ensures the prices wouldn't randomly spike bizarrely, right? Because of the competitive advantage for companies to gain profit, they need to ensure that their prices are not going to suddenly jack up very highly. But thirdly, we said that UN and World Health Organization already have the control over vaccines to lower down the prices for developing countries, right? Which is exactly why Indonesia have stocks of vaccines despite not being as rich as other companies, right? But second rebuttal on their claim, if they want to talk about companies being profit-oriented, 2 responses for this. First, sure, we accept that characterization. However, we said it's going to be justified because the profit is used for further development and research for the people to use, right? It is all of this money that they gain is not only for their own profit, however, it is also for the further the proper medication and treatment to reach recovery for the people themselves. Therefore, the benefit trickles down to the people as well. The second response, even if they want to stop companies from being profit-oriented, stopping patent is not the way, right? Because without the patent, it means that pharmaceutical companies have no control from the distribution of these vaccines itself. 2 possible scenarios that would happen under their side. Firstly, at worst, government in developing countries that are mostly corrupted would only lead to them selling these pharmaceutical products to richer countries that need it instantly, of fairly distributing it to the citizens that are vulnerable, like what government has said, right? Especially in the context of unstoppable COVID-19 cases, most corrupted government will do anything possible to gain the money to the fullest extent, and weaponizing the distribution is one of the ways for them to gain the profit itself. The second scenario that we get, even if we take it in their best case scenario, that distribute it to the people, it won't be strategic exactly because you don't have a patent. You don't have a patent under your side, right? You would only distribute these drugs without clinically proving efficacy of these drugs, thus making it a risky medicine, vaccine, or tech equipment. We can't afford the risk because this is related to people's livelihood, and people's life are irreversible after you created all the harms towards their body itself. But their rebuttal on the developing countries suffering from the colonialization of resources that came from PM. 3 responses for this. First, this is false, exactly because we're living in a modern era in which colonialization and resources without the consent of developing countries doesn't exist. The transaction happens in two ways, in which there is a constructive agreement, and the reason why developing countries agree to sell these resources towards other countries because of their inability of managing these resources in the first place, right? Second response, what does this tell you? It tells you that that one, developing and managing the resources of these developing countries into a medicine, vaccines, or tech companies is the pharmaceutical companies in the developed countries, which means that they are not at fault to developing countries, and we think that they don't deserve a compensation through disallowing the patents, like what PM tried to argue about. But their response, even if they do colonialize these resources under their side by disallowing patents, what will happen is that the incentive for pharmaceutical companies to continue their research would not happen, because in Gov's world, the companies will operate under a law that's not continuing their research because all of the harms goes back to them instead. Therefore, the incentive for continuity is strictly dangerous. So moving on to my arguments, two arguments I'm going to bring. First argument on why do we choose quality over quantity of these pharmaceutical products? 4 reasons why. First, developing countries already have the capacity to create these pharmaceutical products. Companies need to sell vaccines so that we don't have the huge reliance on powerful countries only for the stock of pharmaceutical products to be allocated towards the people. Vaccines, for example, is already accessible in developing countries, because the ones who make it are not just from the first world countries, but also from small states, for example, Cuba, right? How the vaccines such as Sovrana and Abdala already exist, vaccine with higher efficacy compared to Pfizer. Before moving on to my second reason, yes.
You said that you are going to give the profit of the patent to be redistributed for innovation, right? But how is that possible when the profit of that actually goes to companies and they're unwilling to innovate back and instead use it for profit incentives?
It is very contradictory, because PM already said that innovation exists under both sides anyway. But second reason, it is important to make sure the pharmaceutical products are related to to be safe, exactly because it is related to the people's livelihood, right? You can't trade off easy access with high risk of side effects to the people, because notice how side effects such as shortness of breath, allergy reaction that happens to the people is something that's very dangerous, right? Especially when individual responses to these medicines and vaccines are highly different. Through researchers, therefore, thorough researchers, it's crucial to ensure and establish the best products for the people to use and access for them. Third reason, under their side, when you disallow patents on drugs, most likely the drugs that are going to be created under your side are only generic drugs and not advanced drugs, right? This simply gives the people the false sense of security, because you're weaponizing the people's hope to get a good medicine. Instead, you only get a generic medicine under your side. Fourth reason, we disallow patents under the idea of scarcity, especially in the context of desperation, like the current pandemic, for example. You need to hugely widespread the products to the people. And when it comes to vaccine being dangerous, even if we take it in your best case scenario, a lot of pharmaceutical companies are disabled from financial empowerment for further research and manufacturing of better products, exactly because the pharmaceutical products are accessible. There is no huge pressure from your side to pay high prices, making people always underestimating the safetiness of pharmaceutical products instead. At worst, we said that if these companies are profit oriented, which directly leads to my fourth rebuttal on their claim about companies being profit oriented, the harm applies under their side instead. Because franchises, they gain profit out of people's misery and sickness, right? The bigger the crisis is, the bigger the opportunity that they can use for them to generate as much profit for themselves. This is bad under 2 reasons. First, people especially when people are desperately needing these vaccines. Furthermore, especially when there are more triggering factors in developing countries, because society lives under the congested and healthy lifestyle, meaning that they try on how they try to argue that harms are only there for the upper social class is untrue, because the harm directly trickles down to the people, even if they are living under the lower to middle class society, because these people use these pharmaceutical products as well. Second reason, because they don't need to afford afford these patents, it's even easier for them to create pharmaceutical products with higher risk instead, right? This directly backfires government's agenda in developing countries, because more people get sick, or even worse, their health get jeopardized even further. Not only that the blame goes back to the government, but it also comes at the expense of the people's livelihood. Second argument on why a patent is needed. As time goes by, diseases develop even worse. It is important for patents to happen when we have further research, for COVID, cancer, etc., because there are so many branches of disease that elevates from the pandemic, for example, right? Even if we take it in your best case scenario, if accessibility is there, it's not going to be sustainable because you don't have the capital. Because for you to produce these pharmaceutical products, firstly, it is costly. Second, it requires a lot of time. But thirdly, there are no guarantee of success. The uncertain outcomes that come from these researches is exactly why we need these patents, so that these companies would have the capital for them to develop even further researches for these pharmaceutical pharmaceutical product to be developed. Under all those reasons, we're so proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to call upon Deputy of Prime Minister.
So my preferred POI would be either chat or through unmuting, I don't mind. And my preferred pronoun would be she, her. Okay, so I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. So first of all, what opposition is trying to tell us that the world is very that these kinds of companies cannot survive anymore literally if we actually do not have these patents, if these patents do not exist. This is entirely not true, right? What UP has to prove is why pharmaceutical companies have to actually earn that much profit at the expense of the suffering of people. People are dying every single day, and UP has failed to prove why these pharmaceutical companies cannot sacrifice like 0.1 or like 1% of their profit for the welfare of the people in the developing countries that are literally dying every single day from the lack of like these kinds of medicine, or like the lack of these kinds of facilities that these kinds of pharmaceutical companies can actually provide. The thing is, they gave us 3 arguments. First, that they told us that we're gonna actually compromise that these kinds of pharmaceutical companies can actually compromise safety, and that companies will not be incentivized to do these kinds of things. But the thing is that the ones who research on these vaccines are not stupid people, right? They're actually people who actually earn PhDs, and they earn graduate degrees on the subject that they're actually specializing in. And there are also check and balances from organizations like World Health Organization or the Food and Drug Association. So there's no premise at which people they can actually tell us that these kinds of companies are going to compromise safety just because they are losing that 1% of profit. Next is on the idea that they told us that competition is already enough to actually incentivize like these price drop, or that there are actually other alternatives that these kinds of developing nations can actually take. The thing is that Pfizer, the sales of Pfizer, when it comes to these kinds of developing countries, they sell much less doses. When it comes to these kinds of developing countries, tells us that they also have the incentive to actually promote and actually Next is on the idea that they're actually telling us that these kinds of companies will not be incentivized to actually innovate anymore. Because the thing is that they will still actually invest in like these kinds of medicine, and they still can, because the mechanism that we actually provide does not actually hurt their profit deeply. It's only a small chunk of their profit. UP has to prove why by doing this, somehow these kinds of Pfizer or other pharmaceutical companies can suddenly lose their direction, or cannot profit, or will suddenly shut down. So moving on to my extension towards my first speaker's case. First is that we have to pay attention to the characterization of developing countries, especially with the pandemic. There's economic stagnation, there's supply shortage, ballooning debts. Currently, Indonesia owes too much, like trillions and trillions of dollars. When it comes to their debts, people are poor, people are losing their job, people are having trouble getting by day by day, and also to try and put food on the table. So what's of utmost importance when it comes to developing countries then is to save lives instead of like profiting off like these kinds of instead of like having these kinds of pharmaceutical companies actually profiting off suffering people. Because developing countries currently already have a hard time supplying oxygen for hospitals. With so many lockdowns, people are actually suffering, and people are actually out of job. There are so many people who turn into criminal activities because tourism is shut down. Pay attention that this is not only about vaccines, but this is about like other like medicines, like heart disease medicines, or like cancer medicine. Like these kinds of medicines don't come cheap, and so when it comes to people actually, when they actually want to try and like earn the money to actually pay pay for the bills or pay for the bills that are charged by hospitals, because hospitals also have to charge money for these kinds of pharmaceutical medicine, then they would have to do anything to actually pay for them. And so they would resort to things like going for criminal activities. And so because developing countries are not like developed countries, they won't be able to bounce back after a while after the pandemic. Know that yes, this is not a permanent solution, and we're not trying to sell the unrealistic idea that somehow the developing countries can turn into developed countries because they're going to not patent these kinds of drugs anymore. But the thing is that this will definitely help these kinds of countries, and I'm going to prove in my next argument why these companies then would have the moral obligation to help these people, because we want to give access to global health or vaccine access. Because the thing is that these companies like Pfizer are profiting too much. They're profiting literally $3.5 billion on their first 3 months of like their vaccine rollout. So we need to prioritize the well-being of all people at such a critical time when many people are still behind in COVID vaccination. Yes, okay. So people can actually resort to Sinovac, but how many Sinovac can be produced? No matter how much China can ship to us, it's not enough for us to actually cover everyone. So we need to reach herd immunity as quickly as possible to actually reopen the country and to actually get the economy flowing again. And so because we are still behind in COVID vaccination, the government needs to buy as many vaccines as possible. And know that, Sinovac cannot fulfill our like vaccine needs. Like we need other like suppliers to actually give to us. Like for example, Moderna, for example, Pfizer, they need to provide for us these kinds of vaccines. If these kinds of countries cannot actually purchase them, then we cannot reach herd immunity. The country cannot improve at all. And so the thing is, they have the moral obligation to do this. And so the thing is that third is on the idea of why it doesn't actually harm companies or it doesn't disincentivize scientists. Because the thing is that yes, pharmaceutical companies spend a lot on research, but remember that the money that they actually earn does not go to the scientists, because the scientists will still earn normally. They will still be earning their normal salary and also get their normal bonuses. But the thing is that the ones who are actually profiting is actually the corporation. Like, because the thing is that Pfizer is like earning like $900 million like per country when it comes to like the vaccines that they actually roll out. And so then the basic idea is that these kinds of companies are going to profit on their vaccines or profit on their medicine. So this is their capitalist plan. And so Pfizer sale will still be huge. They will still be earning a lot of profit, but just not as much globally. And so they're actually still being helpful to the so they're gonna still actually be earning money, just not as much. And so they actually have the moral obligation to these kinds of things. So yeah, not enough time for POI anymore. It's a thing that it's just basic, right? They will earn too much. It's like have a mask of like 5,000 rupiah getting charged at like 1 million, because the thing is that we need to give global health. Developing countries are having a hard time, because the thing is that we have already proven that we will still get give these kinds of companies the incentive to innovate, and there's nothing such as over vaccination, because then these kinds of countries need the vaccines, and if these kinds of companies can actually provide them with the vaccines, then it will be very helpful for the company and even for the whole world to reach herd immunity as soon as possible to actually open the economy. It will be beneficial it will create like this domino effect that will be beneficial for everyone in the whole world. For all those reasons, very proud to propose.
Thank you for the speech. Next, I would like to call upon Deputy of Leader of OP.
Okay, just to make sure, am I audible right now?
It's your audible.
Okay, gender pronouns she or her. POI preference, you can just directly unmute yourself later on. So I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. My structure is simple, two clarifications, and I explain what is the propositions themes that case that haven't already toppled down by a case, meanwhile they haven't toppled down my LO case, and one brush of framing. So what propositions haven't touched about on the idea is why is bare minimum medicines okay to notice the symptoms of the people, which is a very diverse of people, especially in developing countries, where take it as Indonesia as the context, where more people then more symptoms or even more cases or even medicines that are required due to take it or fulfill with the symptoms that are needed. And then second, on the issue that importance of pattern is in response to sickness that are constantly developing in the status quo, for example, like cancer, COVID, with many variants from Delta, Kappa, and MU, or flu that influenza that has a lot of branches, especially in developing countries that have many triggers lifestyle to achieve that. Therefore, if government side wants to win this debate, they have to explain more than this to kind of the framing. So two clarifications. I will begin on the clarifications on the first mistake of the government side. They insist on blaming us for being profit-oriented out of the suffering of the people. Okay, this is dismissive. We told you that it is justified in the worst case under three reasons. First, proportional to the cost of research and development they make for quality control, because quality control is the utmost responsibility that cannot be compromised. And then second reasons, the profit is used for the further research as a cope-up mechanism to battle unpredictable and developing diseases and symptoms. Third reasons, government cannot prove why the continuity of the research and development would happen in their side. So it's very utopic for them to eliminate profit for pharmaceutical companies. Therefore, we believe that on these clarifications we win. And then second thing to clarify is one question thrown by the Prime Minister that I want to answer is why there will be inclusive to the poor country and why will no monopoly exist. Two answers for this. First, we never say that we want to define inclusivity and wider access to the developing countries, because we are more concerned on the quality of the vaccines, medicines that can only be ensuring by having patents, especially when Rachel told you that there is highly various reactions on the individuals to the medications that exist. So it is okay for us to sacrifice inclusivity because inclusive access exists, but it compromises the quality. We told you that it will perpetuate further distrust for the pharmaceutical
clarification.
Later, because of their hassle actions that potentially harms people's livelihood. For example, like unforeseen side effects, allergic reaction, and body system rejection to the procedures like transplant and chemotherapy, and etc. And then second response, no monopoly will exist. We told you that there is a regulations made by WHO or WHO to ensure no unreasonable spike for the highest prices. That's why Rachel told you about regulations of the maximum price, HEP Indonesia. But even if they insist on high prices that occur, we bite the bullet. This is still reasonable to the quality of the medicines and cost of production and research made by the companies. So if the price is reasonable, so what? This is a proportional, and government side cannot prove why proportionality of the price cannot be compromised. Therefore, we win this clarifications, and it is too late for them to clarify. Actually, moving on to my rebuttals. First rebuttals on the issue of sacrifice the livelihood of the people that came from their side. Three responses for this. First, they push an unfair burden for us to defend the literal slaughter of the people in developing countries, which is very irrelevant, and we see that and out of the debate. And why what they have to define is why patent can be compromised and their quality control further research can be compromised. And then second response, even if we give limited access to the developing countries, we think that it doesn't go to the extent of sacrificing the livelihood, because our government in developing countries will not go that extreme and letting go people suffer, because their credibility and accountability will be at the stake. So the cope-up mechanism that came from the government will make it by strengthening the preemptive measures. And what is the likelihood? The likelihood is that with scarcity and limited resources, it pushes the government to impose strict rules or health protocols. That's exactly why we can see the fact in Vietnam as one of the developing countries is very successful in managing prevention and COVID spiking cases, because they are triggered with limited vaccines and medicine to cure and prevent COVID back then. And lastly, on the response, so the way you have to judge is the harm mitigate. We prove to you that mitigations and benefit in disguise behind the harm exists on our side. So it's not a valid concern. We answer that. And then second response on the issue about developing countries cannot bounce back to the pandemic will be integrated in my speech. One major framing that I will explain about why patent is a worthy trade-off in our side. on the reasons of, because in the propositions without patents, it generates one reason only, which is as my case, which is due to the false sense of security. 2 layers of analysis for this. First, in an ideal world, we want the recovery of the people what we need to prioritize, because recovery is a certain outcome that we want to sustain the credibility of the pharmaceutical companies, because the harm that will happen if we do the opposite, that it makes less productivity of the people once they don't get a profit or fit medicines, due to a lot of failure to people in reaching recovery to the full extent. Less productivity is harmful, ladies and gentlemen, because we are in the context of developing countries, whereas productivity is important to generate decent economic upstart and circulations of the whole country. Therefore, we have to stand for it, right? And the second layer, later on, compared to the government branch without patents, we see that it generates the false sense of security. We see an unworthy trade-off in their case, right? Therefore, in government, no full recovery that came from the society. Another harm that could be created as it could hurt the credibility on the pharmaceutical companies. Why? I'll explain under 2 reasons. First, harm to the privileged actor and the non-privileged actor. So if the DPM said that developing countries cannot bounce back, 3 responses for this. First, this is untrue. In our side, exactly with the patents, we can ensure quality medicines to ensure that the chance of recovery can happen to the fullest extent. Thus, recovery becomes the prerequisite to the people, to the productivity of the people, that generates the bouncing back mechanism. And then second response, even if it is true that they cannot bounce back, then the harm will be symmetrical, because the government rely on the unqualified access of the medicines, vaccines, and technology, and even the society cannot run their agenda, creating economic stability due to compromise the quality since the beginning. That it hinders the chance for them to reach the fullest extent of the recovery and even the productivity that they deserve as a society, right? So the matrix is in this point is harm under their side is similar anyway. Later on, harm is not exclusive in our side only. It will happen worse on their side, because they trade with the productivity of the people, which is crucial in order for developing countries to develop. Therefore, without patent, it is harmful to our 2 actors in this debate. First, to the unprivileged people. False sense of security of the people will exist on our side, because this discourages the pharmaceutical companies to provide an extensive and high quality drug due to inability of them to patent the drug. So they forced to get generic drugs over and over again. While to the privileged actor, this is harmful because to the privileged people in developing countries, this is harmful because they don't get the holistic security or facilities they deserve, or as we can say, as less effective medicines, because they only got a bare minimum medicines in the government's world without a patent. Those comparisons is harmful because it proves to you it makes the society discourage or even have a trust issue to the government in terms of upgrading the medical field in developing countries, right? That exists on their side. By this trust issue, even in the best case of government side, we bite the bullet and the harm of the government, vaccine and medicine is compromised, then the people will have another unqualified alternative, which is for example, goes to shaman. Therefore, it is harmful because the moment the quality compromise, then it will make less likely for the government to focus on research and develop a medical field in the country. Because let us characterize the work of the system of the government. If there's no demand of the society since the beginning, then it leads to no urgency for the government to work in that field, right? Therefore, there's no incentive that came from the government side since the beginning. So the metric you have to judge in this debate is about on their side, under the reason of trust issue to the government that incentivize the government in developing countries to develop the medical field well. Under our side, comparatively, we prioritize the productivity of the nations due to betterment of the country. Therefore, we win this debate.
Thank you very much for the fine speech. Next, I would like to call upon the government whip.
Can I clearly be heard?
Yes, your article.
Okay. POS verbally, I'll take maybe at 4 or 5. Starting in 3, 2, and 1. 2 clashes in this speech. 1 on the right of patents in medicine, and number 2 on innovation and benefit for society. First clash then on patents. We tell you that the principle of patenting is to be able to get credit for the things that you can create. First of all, there are also scenarios where patents rights can be limited when it comes down to the livelihood of the people. For example, right now designers are not allowed to patent clothing, but only the design of the pattern of the clothing, which is why, because clothes are crucial in people's lives, so they must have the ability to also create them, right? But second of all, if what they want is credit, we still give them credit. For example, in our setup, we told you that we're going to give them, for example, 3 to 5% as a royalty. That is why we still give them the credit. The delta in this debate is that whether or not we want these developed countries to control all of the drugs, they control all of the prices within a single company that is profit oriented, which means that you're going to make it really expensive for the people to buy them. But third of all, if they say that people have welfare and donations, we think it's not enough and it's counterproductive, because it's now much harder for people to buy an EpiPen, in contrast to on our side, when they no longer have the penny, they're going to be able to afford 10. That is the truth in the status quo, where the prices are jacked up so much. But right now, we think that welfare is still so unfulfilling, especially in the context of developing countries. Apart from that, there's no intrinsic reason why people have to have the rights to their property, especially when it comes to medicine. Medicine patents depend on how quickly you file them, which is completely arbitrary. What's more, patents are designed for the greater good and not to protect some of the intrinsic rights owners have over their property. This is why patent expires after a few years, for example, because even though the investor can still claim ownership over their product, the patent has exceeded its purpose. Therefore, patents are basically not absolute and no more important than rights of human dignity. So we tell you that patents and rights can be waived, because this will only benefit the company itself and not to the public. So this creates a big problem in 3 scenarios. First of all, many people will die because they cannot access products that can help deal with this pandemic. But second of all, the price of vaccines and security guards will be expensive, and poor countries will not have sufficient funds to buy them. But third of all, they're limiting people to get the vaccine, which has an impact on the difficulty of achieving herd immunity, for example, in pandemic. What did they tell you? Firstly, they say that the UN has been controlling the prices. They have regulations. 5 reasons why that's wrong. First of all, it literally undercuts or even contradicts their entire case and benefit about the importance of price and rights of executive pharmaceutical corporations. Because opposition wants to limit companies' profit, all harms also happens on their side. But second of all, this is nonsense. Patent gives exclusive right to corporations to regulate the prices. The UN can only give guidelines on royalty, but they cannot regulate at all. But third of all, regulation fails because corporations on your side are so huge. We think there's an inherent flaw in regulations in the sense that it's easily waived by corporations. For example, closed doors agreement or cooperation between governments and the corporation. So you have regulations that fail on your side because it's really hard to make it clear to the public. Like, you don't know if the money that you get is going to be reinvented into innovating new drugs, right? But on our side, it's clear and transparent to the public that you can now create the same drug that they do. Furthermore, I think their case is mitigation. No, their only benefit is on innovation. We proved to you that it's a wash, and we have given you responses as to why their claim about innovation is not exclusive and just generally won't happen on their side of the house. Therefore, it's clear that they don't have any positive case at all as to why the patent is so special in order to have millions of people in the context of this motion, which is a developing country, and they haven't proved it. Fifth of all, I don't understand why they brought this claim about, this is about patent, right? And we think when companies get the opportunity to actually patent the innovation that they did, it is much more likely for this company to control the prices, because A, this company knows that they are the only one who sells the medicines, and because they patent the medicine, it means that other corporations don't have any chance to innovate the medicine at all. But secondly, we flip their claim. Exactly, because when people are desperate, it's easier to utilize patents, because logically, if other companies are not allowed to create these medicines, then people who need it would be forced to afford it from this bad company, and this is also the way this company gains so much profit from it. But secondly, they tell you that companies don't have the principal responsibility to do this. No, we prove to you 5 structural reasons why these developed countries' companies have the responsibility to not patent the medicines. The main problem here is that you cannot just dismiss it but negate it. We tell you it's past colonization, it's whitewashing, it's geographical reasons. Like, even though Thailand is not colonized, you can trade with the surrounding areas that are in the past. Why are these crucial? It's because you can only be rich as a developed state, as Japan, because you colonize Indonesia to get profit and use your military power. Or you can only be able to have faster educational development because you monopolize the entire economy during the industrial era. That is why, but even if not, as a corporation that is rich, as a developed country, you have the principal obligation to help people who are dying and not your selfishness. The way then becomes, we get larger impacts. We protect more people in developing countries because we prevent monopolization and jacking up the price. Even if there's a harm on our side, it's okay because there's just less harm because corporations are already rich anyway, but now the majority of the unprivileged people died in opposition team. The prerequisite of quality of drugs, we get better quality of drugs because other companies can produce the same vaccines with better quality like Moderna. On the second question, on innovation and benefit for society. First of all, There's a very interesting point from the opposition team by saying that they're going to give the profit of the patent to be redistributed for innovation. But how is this possible, right? Because the profit of the patent goes to the company who created the drugs. Giving more money to the rich CEOs of Johnson & Johnson or Pfizer makes people who have allergens that threaten their life every single day unable to buy that. And second of all, we also question that why does the company have the incentive to do that? Companies in general don't want to lose profit because they're inherently profit oriented. And how much money are you able to put in to actually create innovation? We also have profit, we also have money, so we also have innovation on our side. Exactly. Since we proved to you that developed countries has an obligation to contribute back to developing countries, and especially in times of crisis like the pandemic, we think they should contribute by giving cheaper and more accessible medicine for the society in developing nations. Then they talk about innovation that will not exist because they don't get profit. Let me emphasize to you again. First of all, this is a huge assumption. Yes.
How do you say that there will be innovations when it comes to developing countries? Your DPM and PM told me that there's hard for them to bounce back after the pandemic issue due to economic stability.
Listen, who are the companies that actually create these drugs in vaccines? For example, it's Pfizer, it's Johnson & Johnson, it's companies in developed states, companies that are rich, companies handled by rich CEOs. That is why they have the ability to actually create these vaccines and innovate in the status quo. We think that that's just logical. But second of all, we tell you that there's a first mover advantage on our side. Corporations still want to innovate because first producers mostly gain more trust from the consumers. Furthermore, in the case of pandemic, because it affects a lot of people and there are big market consumers, and without a patent, you can still sell those drugs anyway. So even if you're not going to have a patent, people are going to buy from you because you sell to them first. Like even though many people already open boba restaurants, people still purchase from them, right? But you have market competition that makes these actors have the incentive to create promotions and cheaper prices. They're more accessible for the buyers. Then the most important thing that I want to point out is they say that people are going to get bad medicine on our side of the house. We flip this in two reasons. First of all, it won't happen because these companies will be able to have access to know how to create your drug and reproduce it, replicate it, because you don't have a patent. So you'll have the same drugs produced on our side of the house, making it more accessible and cheap, specifically for developing countries. But second of all, it will be worse on your side of the house because it's illegal to replicate the drugs that are good and sell them, which means that either you cannot make those drugs at all, or you are going to make those drugs poorly because they can't replicate yours. They're clearly successful. So the way is then we think it's better to fight for less profit and more life safe in developing countries than to fight for more profit for rich investors and CEOs, because they are going to continue to create the medicine anyway because it's their way to get money to sustain their company. Really proud to propose.
Thank you very much for the fine speech. Let's proceed to opposition whip.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, PI through unmuting yourself, but please gentle. Prevent pronunciation here. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Here's what's funny coming from government. Their whole case talks about how we have to ensure the accessibility of the people so people can be safe in the face of pandemic. To promise that the people's safety will be on risk on their side of the house, right? Because first, the government fails to prove from where we get the fund to do further research. Meaning that it goes in the pocket of the corporation, okay, but for what? It's for further research, right? They say that research happened in a trial error process, meaning that most likely it needs a lot of fun. Meaning that, okay, best case can save people for a few months, but what happens when the new friends come in, right? We don't have enough funds to research a new vaccine because patents are too expensive, which they never touch until the end of the day. But second, what's more, that exactly because they want an easier distribution, then most likely the quality of check will be compromised, right? That even small companies that does not go past through the health protocols will still be okay, right? This is a trade-off that girls have to take on, because when you have to sell it cheaply, then you have to still ensure profit for the future research, meaning they are burdened to prove why when people use a vaccine, they'll have the best result and not result in death due to incapability and underqualified vaccines that creates adverse effect. Whereas patent always interested in the medical world, the logic is simple. Human life is not a game that you can play on and compromise easily for whatever reason, right? But two questions debate, no thank you. First, on the justification level, can safety be compromised for accessibility? But second, who can ensure the livelihood of the people even after post-pandemic, right? First, the justification level, can safety be compromised for accessibility? What have we argued to you? I've proved to you about how the quality of this medicine is important, right? The livelihood of the people is important because the compatibility with vaccine and pills fares on from people, right? Just to ensure the quality of the vaccine being distributed to prevent illegal purchase or even unqualified products to be put on the market, especially when people are that desperate to get it, right? But even if it's incompatible, sustainable, we said it won't be sustainable on their side of the house, right? Simply because the funds for further research will not exist, especially when we see that disease does progress into different variants, right? Meaning that most likely on the government side of the house, the research for a vaccine stop at the first phase that only target at prominent variants, right? And the mutation of other variants can be solved simply because the fund originated mostly from patents do not exist on the side of the house, right? As they have to prove where they get their patents from. But yes. Yes.
Do you think that companies get profits solely through patents?
Yes, we said that mostly the money comes from patents, right? Because we said that exactly because they always try to argue about why the reason why this medicine and pills become that expensive is because patents, right? This proves to you that patents is the huge source of money, right? I mean, the most likely on our side, we have the funds to actually do patents, but to do research, but on the side it does not exist, right? I mean that they have to prove to you where the funds come from, right? But they never try to prove to you on to say that patents is not that important, but they never prove the another alternative at all. But second of the problem of accessibility, right? They try to argue that we say that it's not as accessible as the gov tried to portray, right? So that vaccine accessing a lot of from institute like Sinovac, right? There's also cases like third world countries like Cuba that successfully created vaccine, and it's crucial for them to get this patent. Exactly because their DPM themselves says that they see far more or less, right? So most likely the income for future starting funds come from these patents, and this is crucial, right? But even if patents are creating the problem of accessibility or even closed door agreements, there are a lot of alternatives that can be taken by the international community like UN and World Health Organization, or even quotas to each country, mean that high price will be mitigated, right? Especially when we see that health insurance like beverages exist in successful. These are all options that could be taken. But even if the government is still as bad as what Gov tried to portray and how corrupt like the Gov will try to see, so that we can easily call them out and put them in the media spotlight to ask for accountability, right? The case study we can prove to you is about how when Kimia Pharma used disposable antigen, right? That's very dangerous and will happen on the other house, right? That's why pharmaceutical company is vulnerable and there's an incentive that is to avoid bad potential. Instead that Gov is too negative on this side, right? But the burden of proof that now Gov has to prove to us and fail to is why cutting off patents is the only way when we have already provided a very amount of alternatives. In comparison, the harmonious of the house is that while accessibility do exist, what is the trade-off, right? It's exactly what they're afraid the most, which is people taking advantage of the fire to steal, right? Most likely because patents do not exist, distribution is easier, right? Meaning that illegal purchase and vaccines are created under poor environment or underqualified will be taken, especially noticing PM's characteristic of people being that desperate, right? Meaning that the safety will be thrown out of the window. Meaning most likely people's life will still be at risk. Meaning the whole purpose of making it accessible to ensure people's safety is completely being destroyed when the vaccine itself might not be safe at all, but actually taking their life, right? But thirdly, on just of the house, most likely it will give the anti-vaccines people a chance to actually reason that that's the exact reason why we should not take vaccine, right? Because they try to compromise our safety by not using vaccine at all, right? Meaning that most likely in of the house, even if it's so accessible to the people, there will be anti-vax that say no, we don't want to get it at all. Meaning that even if it's accessible, if people don't want to take it, then most likely on just of the house, their benefits are not accessed, right? But on the house in comparison, it actually reminds people of importance of health and patients, right? Saying that it's profit oriented, we accept this characterization, but actually what is the purpose of this profit oriented? It's for the future research to ensure our future safety and not for like temporary safety of it, right? But what did we prove to you, right? We proved about three things. First of all, we don't get how because there's not a lot of money reserved when they disallow patents, right? There's no incentive for the pharmaceutical companies, right? But even if there is no patents, most likely on their side there is less control for innovation because they don't want to have any loss at all. But second, furthermore, we have already told you that the purpose of their innovation exists in our side of the house, right? But the profit that we get from the patents, it could be generated into capital for innovation as in comparison to their side of the house, but not until later. Third of all, the metric that you should just on is the purposes of the benefits, right? Both sides want innovation, but we provide you the prerequisites, which is the patents itself. But on our side of the house, we have no mechanization of it at all. But another metric on this issue is that whether we can compromise safety, right? We have proved to you that we can compromise, right? Because most likely if you compromise, people's life will be endangered, especially when they're desperate. But even if it can be compromised, there are still other ways to actually solve this problem without cutting off the patents, which is like price control or, for example, quotas for vaccine and even insurance like beverages, right? So that regardless of all the accessibility argument, we said the argument about how patents is necessary for future research and sustainable of medical research for future safety still access, yes.
If companies are good, then they wouldn't mind getting less profit, wouldn't they?
Panels, we're not saying the company is good. Company is profit oriented, but at the end of the day, what is the purpose of the profit oriented? It is for future research, so they can get a lot more profit in the future, right? But this is perfectly okay because it's the best scenario, right? It's a win-win scenario for the companies. They can get future profit from future researches, but our safety for future vaccines will also be ensured. But second question, you can ensure the livelihood of the people, right? I've tried to champion that we're cutting off patents we can save developing countries, right? But several ways, right? First of all, it's the extent of harm, right? Your idea is problematic. The problem that DPM is talking about is Indonesia being indebted. Then we say that the harm is even more harmful on their side of the house. Let's just say the economic crisis is our worst case, right? So this is already heavily mitigated with the fact that their access price control, meaning no company can arbitrarily change the price, right? We're not living in a dystopian lawless world. We know people controlling the price and people can just do whatever they want, right? Especially when insurance and capacity quotas exist on our side and efforts such as COVAX exist, right? But even if they insist on this harm, we say that we still accept the idea of economic crisis in face of people's safety of the country, right? We can take on that as long as people's life is actually ensured, right? But on this other hand, most likely people's life will be on stake, right? One thing that they can never prove is that even if they distribute it properly, scarcity is still a problem, right? Meaning most likely even if they can sell it cheaply, on this other hand, shortage will still exist, especially when they never control the quota like us. Then most likely on this other house, hoarding will happen. People will be panic buying in a larger level and internationally. But on our side of the house, it's because we have control, we have patents, it will be systematic, we will distribute it much more better. And the matter here should judgment that whether we can ensure the livelihood of this country, right? All the harm like debt is mitigatable on our side of the house, right? It is hard to bounce back, but not impossible, especially when one country's crisis might break into a global crisis, right? That's why even if crisis happen, a global effort will be used to solve the problem. But on the side of the house, this will not exist, right? Because people are all that, right? Especially on the side of the house, never prove to you as to how on their side of the house they're going to solve the problem of scarcity, or for example, how their side of the house they're going to ensure people safety, or further research. There's no mechanization on it so far to propose. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the speech. To close the case of opposition, I'd like to call upon opposition reply speaker.
Okay, I believe that I'm audible right now.
Sure.
Two. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, 3 reasons why opposition should definitely win this debate. First, on the tipping points about benefit in disguise behind the harm. What the government gave to the table. First, on the issue about developing countries cannot bounce back from the pandemic issue, therefore it is less likely for them to have money for the patent. Okay, few flipping in this case about the government whip is out of the debate and being contradicted because the Prime Minister and DPM already told me about this, how the crisis is less likely for the people to have the patent, and even if they have the patent, it will just have bare minimum medicines since the beginning. And even if sustained from the they are able to sustain from the companies, if you don't have the patent, even Johnson and Johnson can go bankrupt immediately anyway, because it's because one of the income of pharmaceutical companies is gained from the patent, right? Gladys told you that they don't have unlimited budget. Sadly, government is being utopic in this case, and therefore, even if in our worst case that these companies are profit oriented, it is okay because the research and development will be advanced more on our side. We have proven to you by Rachel and me in my previous speech, right? Meanwhile, opposition told you that if it is okay to compromise the easy access without patent because we glorify the sense of urgency behind the patent, right? Therefore, we believe that it will be used for the research and development. That is why it is crucial. We told you that it is important because this is crucial to cope up mechanism. As a cope up mechanism with developing business at sickness, in the status quo. Meanwhile, Rachel told you that COVID has many variants, cancer has many branches, and flu has many development anyway. That's why this is crucial. And lastly, we were the one who mechanizing and illustrating the portrayal, the heart of the fact behind the certain innovations, which is costly and has no certain outcome at all. Therefore, we need a lot of research money to battle the unpredictability, like what Rachel told you, right? What is government response to this case? We need innovations. Okay, then that means that they are firm our case, right? They are supporting our case. Thank you so much for the government for glorifying the importance of patent and research development, and anyway, or even the innovations that came from their side. No alternative of innovations brought by the government earlier. That's why they have to lose their space. And then on the second tipping points about harm under their comparisons of exclusivity. Let's see the best case of government side. Limited accessibility exists on our side. They told me, right? Let me flip this case. We utilize it, right? We could take it take it as a blessing in disguise, just like told you, for the people in developing countries which still have take healthy as an easy thing or underestimated their healthy. My previous study case I have brought to you, the reasons of Indonesia's COVID is still high due to majority of the society still disobey the health protocol, because the moment people see that there is more access, more facilities of medicine that exist, then they will be undermine the importance of health as is. Then what is the toxic mindset of the government bench that we want to utilize is to give the society a slap of reality that medicine is limited and scarcity exists. That is why our blessing in disguise should be prioritized, and blessing in disguise only exclusively happen on the opposition bench only. Comparatively, on the best case of oppositions, we see that also people productivity are able to be achieved, not just on their side. The government's credibility is safe, and economic stability that came on the government side already exists on our side as well, because we know that productivity is the key for the developing countries to develop in the end of the day. Therefore, we believe that and also in the third tipping points about the accessibility, our claims is that developing countries already have the capacity to create vaccines. Cuba successfully creating vaccines for the people access. Compare on their side, the people will always have a mindset that as long as there is a medicine that exists, it is okay for us to underestimate. Therefore, the pharmaceutical companies always rescue them with the accessible medicine, vaccines, or the technology. Therefore, it's lessening the urgency to be preemptive, especially from the government side, which is actually that is their responsibility. We prove to you that the harm of this sacrificing the accessibility is a blessing in disguise to push the government to construct the extreme preventive measures for the sake of the all layers of society, because we know that medical is really crucial to all layers of society. We provide you the case study of Vietnam, the successful country in COVID management during the era of the SCAR vaccine. Therefore, we believe that we should win this debate.
Thank you, everyone. Now inviting the last speaker of the round to proposition reply. Speaker, the floor is yours.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you. The most vulnerable people in this debate are not the conglomerates, but poor people in developing countries. Are you kidding me? Opposing your entire case relies on the assumption that companies are always good. By the concession that companies are profit-oriented, that then just justify the fact that companies have the incentive to create shortages and exclusivity, which makes it more expensive. But two reasons why they have lost this debate. Number one, opposition doesn't know how to protect the most vulnerable actors in this debate, who are poor people in developing countries. Their only response to our case is that, oh, there's regulation from the UN. No, judges who have responded to this with 5 structural reasons. But most importantly, this is only contradicting and undercut their whole argument about innovation, because corporations get less money from opposition as well, because they cannot get any more money because there's regulations. But secondly, innovation is washed out in this debate, since we proved to you that there is first mover or first developer advantage, but moreover, because pharmaceuticals are in a large economic demand. Generally, innovation still exists. No proper engagement until they replace speech. Okay, even though you are going to get innovation somehow, which we don't understand, because you need to give a profit for the investors and CEOs. But even so, they're going to make the innovative drug expensive as well, because now their profit is just support for innovation. Even so, we think that innovation is still inevitable, because these are educational institutions. There's journalists, people desiring to get a name for their company and be a part of the legacy to cure cancer, for instance. Two questions in the speech then. Number one, accessibility. Secondly, who helps developing countries the most? Firstly, about accessibility. They said that the companies are going to be good. Two responses to this. Number one, no, like what they've considered, they are profit-oriented. A lot of corporations cost pollution for cheap products, make thousands of people with not allergies suffer just to make their CEO far more rich. But secondly, let's take them at their best. If companies are good, A, that means they don't mind if there's no patent right now, because they don't care about profit. They care for the people, right? So if they are good, then they will not get any patent anyways. But B, they said no, which is surprising. But they also consider companies profit-oriented, which means they could just jack out the price and do price gouging and just say, hey, it's for research. That is why it's bad. Let me clarify, it's not clear enough for you. The drug is, for example, like $10. But with a patent, no one can do anything about it. They can sell for like $50. But with a patent, they can only sell for like $12, for example, because there are other companies. The reason why they can still be profitable is because the other companies also can use the same material as you do and can sell it for far more cheaper than you do, and they can also want that kind of profit as well. The only alternative if companies jack up prices is their segregation. Number one, we respond that their case about more money to corporation and innovation will wash out. Thank you, opposite, for making that claim and concentrating to your 4 case. Secondly, regulation is less likely not happening because patent give you rights to determine the price. Thirdly, who will regulate that? That UN. The UN has no rights to regulate the price of. But fourthly, even if regulation happen, it's easier to lobby the government because companies have the right of property, and the property is the patent that they have already made towards those drugs. But then they say that the drugs will be bad under outside the house. But note that all of their benefits are symmetric. Under our side, companies want consumers. Most likely they want to make the best drugs so they can get more consumers. But two, there's competition, so they want to innovate to stay relevant. So therefore, incentive to make and research to compete in the market. Comparatively, there's no competition on all because patent will restrict all form of competitors. They cannot reproduce the drugs at all. But then they say that the company only gets money from patents. Yeah, this is true to some extent. Yes, they get additional money from patents. But without patents, they can also get money and profit as well. So what they're trying to defend is companies getting more and additional money and profit. But then they say that innovation won't happen on the outside of the house. One, I preempt this in my PM speech. Innovation happen on the outside as well because there's competition on who won the best company, who have the best drugs. Therefore, innovation is still symmetric. Secondly, let's take them at their best. If they have emerging innovations, which is their only benefit, by the way, the problem is there's only one corporation who have that good drugs, which means A, they can monopolize the market. B, even if they are good, the distribution rate is very low. This is only one company can do it. And the outside, more than one company can make that good quality of products. But second question, on who helps developing countries the most? They said they can have quality for products for developing countries. Again, this is symmetric. I mean, if finally the price is getting higher because of the monopolization, then at the end of the day, it leads to a betterment of innovation because they want to attract consumers, right? It's even that is why it's even worse on their side. If people won't get any single medicine and die on the side of their side of the house. On our side, we think that at least there is competition in the market, and this also leads to more and more like cheaper qualities, a cheaper cheaper price, but better qualities because they wanted to compete with other companies as well. But they never respond to 5 structural reasons on why developing countries need these kinds of cheap price. Because there are still colonization, there's still historical representation that they still need to give, and there's kind of obligation towards the developed countries to give towards the developing countries. For all those reasons, we still think that we can win this debate, and I'm very.
Thank you very much for the fine speech, everyone. And that would be the end of this debate.